folks, welcome to Driftwood Guitars. My name is Chris. Behind the camera is Matt, as always. And we are moving right along with our 3,000-year-old guitar build. And as we remember in the last episode, we leveled the sides and got it all prepped up to do the binding work. So that's what we're going to do in this episode, is do all the binding work. And I know for a lot of folks, including myself, when I first got started building, the binding is like super scary. I guess that would explain why Martin stopped doing it.
Wow. Okay. Well, hey, you know what? At least Martin fanboys are like all really nice and not violent at all.
That's true.
They're generally pretty apathetic about their guitar brands. So yeah, exactly. What's the worst that could happen?
Taylor does it too. So
yeah,
and Gibson. But anyway, so what we need to do is do the binding. Now, the reason why this is scary for so many folks is because you've got this guitar that looks done. Looks like you could almost put a neck on it right now and be finished with it. And now you're gonna like strap a giant router to the side of it and possibly screw the whole thing up. But it is a necessary evil if you want to build a guitar using the techniques that I've been using here, especially by bringing your binding or your bracing out of the side of the guitar. At that point, you pretty much have to do binding. And the binding does more than just decorative. It's actually designed as almost a bumper around the entire perimeter of the guitar. It protects the end grain. All of this end grain at the bottom of this is very vulnerable to cracks and to being bumped into things and causing cracks up the neck. So the binding serves the purpose as protecting of that as well. So in my opinion, it also kind of just locks everything a lot more in, and you get a much more rigid guitar, which can help tone the tonality of the guitar. So there are about an ungodly number of jigs that exist out there to do binding. If we think about what the binding needs to do, we're gonna pretend this saddle, just because it's out. We're gonna pretend this saddle is the router bit. We need to cut our binding channel around the entire top of the guitar and the back of the guitar. The important thing is that the binding channel is cut parallel with the sides or perpendicular to the top and the back. But you have to remember, the reason this gets complicated is because the top of the guitar has a dome to it, but the back has a very large dome to it. So if you were to use the top or the back as the reference for your router, you're going to have issues with your binding channel not being parallel to the sides, especially if you think about things like over here on the back. This top really drops off, and if you were to use that as your reference, your router is going to end up cutting it at a bad angle. So what you have to use is different jigs. The jigs, what they do is they hold the router perfectly parallel with the sides so that you get a proper binding channel. That's a complicated way of explaining that you can't just do this freehand without messing it up. You have to have some sort of jig. And so what I use these days is this new tool by Elevate. Elevate is based out of Montana, or where are they at? No, they're Missouri. They're out of Springfield. A guy named Chris makes all of these tools. Amazing customer service. This thing is incredibly awesome. But for years,
They didn't pay us to say that.
No, not at all. They did not pay us to say that. I got this. I actually bought this jig on a whim. I was like, saw it pop up on my feed. I'd already had tools from them, and then he had just come out with this. This is their ultimate binding jig, and just bought it. And I absolutely love it. It's just been incredible. It is a little bit more of an advanced jig. This can be, I would not recommend this for somebody who's just getting started, because it is sporty for the uninitiated, as far as like the ability to mess up. Look, there's a fly on me. The more user-friendly one can be StewMac. The StewMac one is a really good one. And then there's also all kinds of DIY jigs that you can do, because I know that it can be prohibitively expensive. So you can actually make little shims for even using a Dremel tool if you want to do this. But anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to set this thing up. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of exactly what we're looking at and how to make it work. This actually can go inside of a vise if you want, but I actually just have some threaded inserts built into my workbench so that I can mount this in place. We have a little bit of a situation going on here. There's a fly, and we have this assault gun.
Say, tell me you're from Florida without telling me you're from Florida.
So I'm gonna leave this at the ready, and when the fly comes around, ready to kiss her. Anyway, we have the ultimate binding jig mounted to my workbench. I just wanted to give you guys a quick rundown of exactly how it works. I think it'll help you better understand the reason that the jig exists in the first place. Using just a standard laminate router, you can get these at Home Depot, Lowe's, any box store, nice and cheap. I have like 4 of these things. They're just super useful to have. But what this is going to do is initially what you see here, this is what the guitar body sides are going to ride on. We're going to take that and we're going to move this around like this. And the thing that's cool about that is what that does is basically ensures that the router is perfectly parallel with the sides. I think you can see that really well from the angle that we have the camera set up at. It's not riding perpendicular to the back. If it was riding perpendicular to the back, I would need to do it at an angle like that. Right. But instead it's here. Normally, in some of the more traditional ways of doing this, what you have is you have a router and it has different bearings on it. You'll have like a bag full of like 20 different bearing sizes, and then you would look at a chart and you would say, okay, well this is, you know, whatever, I don't even know what this is, whatever the thickness of my binding is. I would say this is like 2.1 millimeters thick, so I got to sort through my binding, or through all my bearings, and find the bearing that's designed to cut a ledge that's that size. What's really nice about this jig is that I can actually loosen it up, put this piece of binding in here, and then tighten this down. And now it's all dialed in for the thickness of this. It's like there's no measuring required. Instead of measuring it, you're just cutting it to whatever the thickness of the piece that you're trying to cut. So you'll set your depth of cut there, and then I set my depth of cut in this direction this way. I'm trying to get my arm out of the shot. And now it's like done. We're already set up and it's ready to go. So that's cool. We're set up there. If I was to be doing this same cut for something that's like a little bit more advanced with like pearl and purfling and everything, I'd do the exact same thing. I'll stack it up, which is what we're gonna do in the next step. So I think that kind of gave you a good idea of how we do that, and it's already dialed in. The one thing that I would recommend that you do when you do this is that you want to do your first initial test cuts. Just do like an inch of testing. You can do it on a scrap piece of wood, which is a really good recommendation. Just do it on there to make sure that you get everything dialed in. The other thing that you can do once you do it on the guitar is to just do it in this area right here, because remember, if you do mess up this little spot, it's going to be covered up by the fingerboard extension. So if there's anywhere on your guitar where you have a little bit of wiggle room to mess up, it's going to be just in this inch or two that's underneath the fingerboard. But so I'm going to go ahead and just run it because I've trusted it. I've used this system before, and we'll do a little bit of a test cut real quick. Maybe let Matt put his cans. I'm going to put Matt's cans on his ears.
Oh, thanks. There you go.
Boom. And I'm just going to cut that little spot, and then I'll show you how it looks. We'll need you.
There's the fly right there.
Where's he at?
On the blinds.
One shot, one kill. Boom!
Hey! Yeah. Dude, I love how you're doing that with like what's about to be a $20,000 guitar basically behind you. Like,
it's a professional outfit we're running around here.
No screwing around, man.
We'll put a link in the description for the assault gun. Seriously.
They totally paid us to say that. No, I'm just kidding. No, they didn't.
So that's gonna cut that one little spot. I digress. So there you go. We have a spot. I'm just gonna break off a little piece here. And you can see it fits in there very nicely. I'm actually gonna change the depth of the cut just a little bit, not make it quite as deep. But it looks really nice, so we're just gonna make a tiniest little adjustment and then we'll move forward with it. Nothing major, but you can see why that's a good spot to do your tests, because if you're gonna have issues, you can just make a little adjustment. Tighten that up. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do the whole perimeter of the guitar. We're going to follow that same method that we did when we were cleaning off the sides of the guitar, making sure that we're always cutting downhill. I know that there were some really good recommendations for folks about doing a spiral cut bit so that we don't get any tear out. Well, this bit that's here is just a straight cut, so we don't have the luxury of that. So once again, we're always going to try to fall downhill, starting with the peaks, coming down, and just being aware of that, especially on the top of the guitar. So that's what we gonna do. Let's see. I think we can see pretty well there. Our binding channels. Let's see. Perfect. Everything fits in there really nicely, nice and flush. No issues anywhere. The only thing that I would say that you're going to make sure of if you're using this technique with this is that you're getting really good bearing. A lot of times you'll see me, I'll make my initial pass, and then I'll actually come through and I'll do the whole thing again. So what I'll do before I fully finish this up is just go through the front and the back of the guitar, even though I've already cut the channels, just to make sure that they're nice and smooth. There's no lumps inside of them. If you are doing the arm bevel or the rib bevel, you need to be very careful as you come, no matter what binding jig you're using, as you come around to the section where the bevel is, that you don't fall off like that onto the part of the bevel, because it can mess up your transition. So as you come to those sections, just be very careful. You're going to, I don't know if we can get Matt in there, you're going to get your bevel, your binding to just kind of fall off into that. And we're going to hand cut in the transition that's on there. So what we'll do is I'll spin it around and we'll do the backside. Nothing different there. Pretty straightforward. Think that. Matt's having to do gymnastics to get around cables. I think that gets us done on the front and the back. Just gonna check it one more time. Perfect. I'll spin her around here just to check this as well. Beautiful. The nice thing for if you're making your own binding, if you do happen to like cut a channel too deep, you can just make some new binding that matches the channel. That can make it a little bit of some free space there. So that would be if you're doing just binding, you're done. Bada bing. Now I want to add purfling and pearl to this guitar. I think we're gonna do just purfling on the back, and then on the front we're gonna do the abalone trim, the pearl all around the front. So it'll be two slightly different operations, but once again, just pointing to how cool this binding jig is. All I've got to do is take what I want for my purfling. I think on the back what we'll do is just a white, black, white, so that we get quite a bit of a little pop of color on there. So all I got to do to reset my depth of cut is to stack these. And let me see here, it's just super intuitive. Sometimes I forget which way to turn the knob, but
righty-tighty.
This if it's upside down, so it all gets checked. So that's good.
You gotta make the L's with your hands.
That's right. That's good to go. Pull that out. And then all we got to do is reset the depth now, not to the binding, but to the purfling. So we'll set this depth over here to that. Pretty intuitive. I don't have to go out and change out bearings or anything like that. So this is just makes it nice and easy. Remembering that we're doing this just to the back. This will be just our back cutting operation. So what this will do on this cut is it's not gonna cut into the channel we've already cut at all. All it's gonna do is add a secondary ledge just for the purfling. So I'll run that real quick. We're not gonna see nearly as much sawdust on this, and I'll show you what it looks like. Yeah, so what we have here is you can hopefully see that there is a nice little secondary ledge that's built into this now, which is the exact size for our purfling. So if I set this on here as just a test, we should see, wait for it, it's always a little finicky. There. Nice. Perfect. Perfect little ledge there for it. So that back is done. Like I said, your mileage is going to vary depending on which jig you're using. Everybody's got different techniques. Like I said, this Elevate jig works really, really well. So that gives us our back. Something that probably didn't pick up on camera just for editing purposes is that we did not show the whole step, but I did go through several times, even after I cut all those channels, just to make sure that I got any sort of low spots out of it. So just keep spinning it as more times than you think that you need. So we're gonna flip this thing around now and do the top of the guitar, which on the top of the guitar is a little bit more complicated because we're doing the arm bevel, but we're also doing an abalone trim around the whole top of the guitar. So it can just be slightly more complicated, but it's not super. It's using this jig. We're just gonna do that same method where we stack everything together and then just measure it out there. The way that you would do this if you're using the bearing method, you're just going to stack everything that you're going to use together, measure how wide that it is, and then find the corresponding bearing that you need to get that depth. But in my case, I don't have to do that. So what I'm doing here,
weird flexibility.
What I'm doing here, this is not the order they're going in. I'm just stacking them together, all four pieces, 2 pieces of purfling, and the piece of abalone, and then the binding itself. And we're going to feed that into here and then reset our depth to that. Pretty straightforward. Right. Let's see. Feels good, looks good. Cool. It feels nice and good. So that's cool. And we're going to set the depth of our cut to just slightly deeper than the depth of the abalone. And let me just dial that in. Okay, looks good, feels good. All right, so that it looks nice. What we're gonna do is it's gonna look very similar to what we did on the top. Because we're hogging out a lot more material on this, out of the soundboard specifically, we really, really want to adhere to those cutting downhill rules of operation. And then we also are, once again, going to be very mindful of where the bearing wants to fall off, or where the bit falls off of the, where the bevel starts and ends. So that's the only thing that's going to be slightly different if you're not using an arm bevel. But be careful with this one, because this is your soundboard we're talking about here. And it's only 3,000-year-old Sitka that I can't replace.
Right.
That they don't make any more of.
Right. What's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah, it's fine. It's just for Will.
Yeah.
Yep. So hopefully we can see that really well. Yeah, you're gonna end up with a little bit of fuzzies around the top, but watch, I'll grab a little piece of sandpaper real quick. It can be a little bit of an optical illusion to look like your channels aren't. Yeah, let's move the light.
Yeah.
These channels can look like they're not super smooth, but they are. There's one issue right here. I don't know if you see that little spot where it bumps up and back down. So I'll make sure that I fix that. But everything looks really nice. So let's go back to always testing our fitment. If I come over to this little spot here, we'll put our binding in. This is always this spot is always a good place to test because it's pretty flat in this area. This is finicky, but we can usually get a good test out of the whole deal. There we go. Come on, come to daddy. Boom. That's what we're looking for. So I feel really good about that. I don't think we're gonna need to do any adjusting. I'm just gonna go through it one more time and make sure that it's nice and smooth. And you can see here, let's keep a tight shot there, Matt. You can see how this just falls off into the bevel. Mm-hmm. And then the same thing here, this one just falls off very nicely. We're not done with that. That's just kind of getting going, but there's a few more steps involved in getting that transition from the binding into the bevel and back into the binding again that we're gonna finesse. We're gonna do all that by hand with chisels and sandpaper. But I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The cool thing about doing the binding channels is it's an opportunity. This is kind of like your first opportunity, other than the rosette, to be building something and adding something to the guitar that's just purely decorative. You can choose, like I like to use, like we're gonna do maple binding on this guitar because it's gonna add a nice pop of color to the dark top and the dark back. You can use anything you want. I love using Hawaiian koa as a binding material because it's really beautiful. You can do plastic. I don't like to use plastic because I think it makes the guitar look a little cheap and it's hard to get plastic to stick to wood. But yeah, have fun with it. Be very, very careful. It is very, very scary. It feels very unnatural if you've never done binding channels before, and that's perfectly normal. But if you just take your time, triple, quadruple check your work. Something we didn't do here was showing you how to just testing it out on just a scrap piece of wood. You can just grab a 2x4 and test on there to your heart's content until you know you've got everything dialed in. Make sure all your screws are tight, and then just let it rip. It's not as risky as it looks. It just feels weird. But hope you guys enjoyed this episode. In the next episode, what we're going to do is actually going to start gluing in the binding on the guitar. And it'll be almost finished, and this thing's going to start to look super nice. But yeah, so I appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.